All right, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Um, it is Wednesday the 23rd, and this class is about statutory disclosures. I look back and I hadn't done this class in a while. I think over a year. So I decided to do it again. Um, um, so let's just get right into it. I hopefully it's not going to take um, the whole hour, but I want to go over what are the statutory requirements are for residential 1 to 4. So if it's not a residential 1 to 4, these are not statutory requirements. And um, if the property is exempt, if it's a bankruptcy, if it's a probate, if it's a surviving trustee, those trustees who haven't lived in it for over a year, if they are exempt, um, uh, the TDS, when I get to it, is not required, but these other ones still are. But there are exceptions, other exceptions. So let's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 statutory requirements are the agency disclosure, the confirmation of agency, the TDS, the NHD statement, the fire hardening and defensible space if applicable, the lead-based paint if it's built before 1978, and the earthquake risk disclosure statement, which is inside the earthquake booklet, if it is before 1960, if the property is built before 1960. So those are the 7 required statutory disclosures. Oh, I've got 3 people. Sorry. So let's just start with the relatively easy one, which is the agency disclosure. So let me share my screen here. That's it. Okay. So you should be seeing the disclosure, the agency disclosure. Somebody give me a thumbs up that that's what you're seeing, or a yes. Um,
Yes.
okay, great. So AD, so this is for those of you who've been in the business for a long time, you know that they didn't really bundle them all together like they do now. And you would have to put this form when you were getting your client to sign documents. You had to put this form at the top of the pile. So now you don't have to do that because it is the first form on like a listing agreement. It's the first form on a purchase agreement. So what is the agency disclosure? The agency disclosure is just that. It is disclosing what agency is and the different types of agency. That is all that this form is. So there's a seller's agent, there's a buyer's agent, there's an agent representing both the buyer and seller, and it lists exactly what the duties are of those specific types of agents. So, and what the seller and the buyer are responsibilities for. So this form can be used either for a buyer or a seller or landlord or a tenant. So whatever the applicable box it is, you check it and get them to sign it. And you, as the agent, sign it also. Although agency is with the brokerage, it's not with the individual agent. So you guys are seeing this form, correct? Because Alan says he can't see it.
I think we're seeing a different screen, Rich.
You're seeing a different screen?
Because your session will expire in 0 minutes due to
Yeah, I'm seeing log out,
Oh,
redirect.
okay. I shared the wrong one. Okay, never mind. Hold on. Sorry.
You just want to see if we're awake, Rich.
Let's wait. Let's make sure. Is this? Yeah, this is the one now because I'm seeing that it was okay. Sorry about that. So this is agency. It lists what a seller's agent is, what a buyer's agent is, what a dual agent is, and what the buyer and seller responsibilities. It's just explaining agency. That's all that this form does. And on the second page, it's the actual statute in the state, the state statute. That's what it is. That's all the second page is. And you'll notice in the body of the statute, it lists the confirmation. And this exactly what it's going to look like, and that's in the RPA. And that's your second statutory disclosure, the confirmation, agency confirmation. So, if you don't fill this out correctly, it needs to be redone and done correctly. So, any questions on agency? If not, I'll go. If you don't do the agency correct, oh, I see a chat thing. All right. Residential lease transaction, the agency is not included. So yes, residential lease, the agency is not included. So what do you have to do? You have to go and get this from zip forms. So yes. I gotta move everybody down here. Okay. So, like I said, if you don't do this right in the RPA, you've got to redo it. And it is there in zip forms, and it's called confirmation of real estate agency relationships. And this is exactly how it looks in the RPA. Who's the seller brokerage and the brokerage license number, and is this the broker for the seller or is it for the buyer and the seller, or the tenant and the landlord? So first the brokerage, then the agent's name. So if you put it's for both the buyer and the seller, or landlord and tenant, whatever you put in the top part, it's going to automatically populate in the bottom part. Then everybody just needs to sign it. So this is only used if it's not done correctly in the RPA. That is the only time you would ever use this. So, but if you do it wrong, you do have to do it correctly because it's required by state statute. So that is, now I gotta move you again. Maybe we move you over here to this. Okay. Great. So that is confirmation, agency confirmation. Anybody have any questions about agency confirmation?
Rich, do we need to do this for residential leases as well?
No, this is only for purchase.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rich, and this is
Um,
only if you didn't get the agency correct.
Correct.
Regularly.
That's correct. Only if you didn't get it correct on the RPA, then you have to redo it. Okay. All right. Next one. Let me go back. Where am I? All right. Next one is TDS. So the TDS is a state required document to transfer real estate on a purchase. Okay. Residential 1 to 4. It's exempt if it's a bankruptcy, if it's a probate, if it's a surviving trustee, it's exempt. If it's a trustee who hasn't lived in the property for over a year and it's a revocable trust. But here's the caveat to that. Okay, I get this all the time. Well, they haven't lived in it, but they used it as a rental. They haven't lived in it, but it's been a rental for 15 years. Well, that still doesn't get them off for not disclosing things that they have knowledge of. And I'm telling you, if you've rented a property for 15 years, you have knowledge about that property. So it doesn't get them off the hook from disclosing things, but it is not required. This form is not required. This specific form, the TDS. So the TDS is once again residential 1 to 4. You have to put the city, the county, and the property address. Please date it. That's important. And once again, you are going to check no substituted disclosures for this transfer. Even if you have inspection reports, this is not the place to give inspection reports. And the first checkbox, inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of the sale for receipt of or for deposit. That is a specific inspection to handle everything that's on this list. So that's not applicable. Additional inspection reports or disclosures, it's not applicable to check that box. You're going to send a receipt of reports in regards to if you're sending additional inspections. So you're not going to use it here for this form. So you're going to check no substituted disclosures for transfer. Is this seller occupied? Yes or no? That's very important. Is it seller occupied? Then you just check off exactly what's in the property or have you don't check it off. I got to correct myself. You need to have the seller fill this out. You do not fill this out or this SBQ. It is the seller's responsibility to fill this out. And Glide is great at filling these disclosures out because they present it in a better way, not like this form with all these boxes you have to check. It's presented in a way that is easy for people to check. Oh, I have this, and this, and answer these questions and whatnot, and it automatically populates what they answer into this form. So I recommend using Glide, even though some agents don't like it because of who it's owned by. But I do recommend using it. So no, Matthew, that's not correct. TDS is required. It is required. It is required if it's a residential 1 to 4. Absolutely. It's exempt for those reasons that I gave, which is bankruptcy, probate, a surviving trustee or a trustee that hasn't lived in the property. It is not an optional document. So
Can you hear
let's
me?
make sure that that is, yes,
No, what I'm asking is
yes.
that, I'm asking that, if those are not the case, then they have to fill in the transfer disclosure. But if I have a listing coming up that the trustee is selling it, they haven't lived in the property for 60 years. So TDS is not mandatory, but it's suggested. And he is a trustee.
If it's in a trust and they haven't lived in it for 60 years, I would say they don't have to, because there is another form that they can use, but they still have to disclose other things, what they know about it.
Right.
It's not required if they haven't lived in it for like 60 years. Yes.
What would be the form that would?
I'll show you the form after this. Okay. Michael, oh no, right. Maureen, Glide, or Andrew, you asked about Glide. Glide is a program that aids an agent in filling out seller disclosures and their own disclosures. It'll also do an Avid. So I would look at it. I would go to Glide, Google Glide and look at it, it's really helpful, and sellers like it. So I want to point some things out about here about the roof, the type, don't leave blanks. Don't have your seller leave blanks. I don't know what the age is. It says approximately. Can you think about how old do you think put a number there? But don't leave it blank. Are there, to the best, Maureen, yes?
Well, I was just going to say, I know we've had times where sellers just say they really don't know. So instead of leaving it blank, would you suggest don't know? Or what, if they can't come up with a number, what would you suggest?
I would suggest they come up with a number, because
Okay.
it's an approximation.
Right.
I don't know. I've had the house for 5 years, and when I bought it, I think they said it was like 10 years old. So I guess it's 15. Have them come up with a number. I wouldn't say I don't know, because I don't know. I don't know isn't, and I wouldn't put it, Alan, I wouldn't put a range. It's an approximation. Nobody is going to hold them because it says approximation. So other is where you can put other things maybe that are unusual to the property. Are there, to the best of the seller's knowledge, any of the above that are not in working condition? That's a yes or no answer. If it's a yes, you have to say what they are. Going to the second page, is the seller, and these questions are couched that, is the seller aware of any significant malfunctions of the following? So, and it lists all these things. If they're not aware, then the answer is no. If the answer is yes, they need to describe what is what's the issue with whatever they're saying is malfunctioning. And then once again, is the seller aware, and to answer all of these questions? If it's a condo and they have a CC&R, the answer is yes. And if they've answered yes to any of these questions, put an explanation, because there are going to be those agents who are going to say, you answered yes, you need to have an explanation. Michael, 210 wiring, it's on the first page. Yes, there are 220 wiring. Most electric dryers are 220, some stoves are 220. So yes, that's the but otherwise it's 110. It asks about lawsuits, it asks about citations, abatements, common areas, and like I said, if the answer is yes, then you need to write an explanation here. The seller certifies that the property at the close of escrow will be in compliance with the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide and bracing and all of that. This takes the place if the seller fills this out. You don't need a water, a water heater smoke detector, WHSD form, which asks these very same questions. So this is covered. Now, there are some brokerages, this brokerage is not one of them, or these offices are not one of them, where they still insist that you supply the WHSD, even though it's covered in the TDS. Now you can argue with them till the cows come home, but it's one, you have to pick your battles sometimes. And is it worth the argument to, just to have your sellers fill out the form? That's up to you. So anyways, so then the seller signs this at the bottom of page 2. Then page 3, this is very important, that the agent is required by law to do a visual inspection. That is required by law. And as a brokerage, I require that the agents do this visual inspection and supply an AVID, which is an agent visual inspection disclosure. So you are always going to say, see attached agent visual inspection disclosure, and the agent representing the seller then signs this. Okay, so very important. If you're representing the seller, this form is not complete until that AVAD is attached. Meaning, for those agents who don't do their AVID until the walkthrough at 5 days prior to close of escrow, this TDS is not complete. So if there is something in your AVID, even though the buyers have removed all of their contingencies that the buyer doesn't like, they can rescind this contract and walk away. So it is very important to do your AVID early in the transaction. You can even do it when you take the listing, but it's very important that you do the AVID and attach it and send it with this TDS. And this only applies to the listing agent. It doesn't apply to the buyer's agent, because everybody felt that the buyer's agent could then hold up the deal, holding back the AVID. So that's the seller's agent fills out that. And then the buyer's agent fills out this. Now you're going to get some smaller agencies that are just going to check the box, the agent notes or no items, and they're not going to supply an AVID. And people ask me about this all the time. Well, they won't supply an AVID. Well, if they're not a KW, that's between them and their broker, and their buyer's agent, that's between them and their broker. If they are another KW, then I would want to know about it, because I would go to that KW's broker and say, do you know that your agent isn't supplying an Avid when we are required to do when we're required to do a visual inspection? And to answer your question, Alan, yes. Even though a seller is exempt from doing this, that does not release the agent from doing the visual inspection. So
Rich,
Any-
question
sure,
on that, so if they mark the box that says items noticed in that small little box and they don't do the whole
Sure.
Avid, can the buyer
Right.
still rescind or no?
no,
No.
because they're the buyer's agent. I don't care what they write.
No, I meant on the listing agent.
If you're a listing agent and you're working for this company, I will not accept that.
No, I know.
You
but
have to do oh, I see what you're saying. If
the
it's
other
another
listing
agent, if you're another agent, yes, that's fine. If it's another agent in another brokerage and they're just writing that, I mean, that's yeah,
If the
it's
buyer
completed.
can't cancel due to that.
No, the buyer can't cancel. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. No, the buyer can't cancel. Because it's completed. But because we're saying see attached Avid, then it's not complete until that Avid is attached. So yes.
What if the other listing agent puts agent notes, no items for disclosure? But something comes, they could just say that and then the buyer can't cancel if something,
Right, no, the buyer can't.
okay, thank
Nope.
you.
Okay. So that's the TDS. Any questions on the TDS? Not seeing any. So the question was asked, if the seller is exempt, what do you use? And oh, I see a question. If sellers are husband and wife, can only one of them sign the disclosures? Not if they're both on title. You have to have all sellers sign all disclosures. So, and if there's more than two, then you have to use the additional signature addendum. So the question was, if they're exempt, what do they use? They use this form, which is the exempt seller disclosure, and they just have to answer these questions. And this is where within the last 3 years, a death of an occupant on the property of the property upon the property. That's really a weird way to say it. But anyways, so has that somebody died on the property in the last 3 years? So you have to disclose that. Now, it's always the question is, well, do you have to tell them how they died? I always go back to our good friend Gladys Kravitz, because I mean, you don't have to get into specifics, but if it was known, if you think that it's known by, if it's like somebody killed themselves in the house, you know that our neighbor is going to know that. And if you don't, you don't have to go into details, but I would say, somebody did they took their own life in the house, and you could say they may want to know what room it was in. I mean, you don't have to go into the graphic details, or but I would say that it's better to disclose some things than not, because that they're going to find out about it, and then it's going to become an issue. In regards to the plumbing fixtures, it's been asked, what's the civil code? it's non-compliant plumbing fixtures are fixtures that are not, um, the term just went out of my head. The low flow toilets, that's non-compliant. That's what the civil code is. So it has to be low flow and all that. Plus, in the city of Los Angeles, you have to do a retrofit and all that. So this is the form if they are exempt. Any questions on the form? Not hearing or seeing any. So, all right, NHD. So I don't, you're never probably going to see a form. It's the NHD statement, and we all have seen it. It's not in zip forms. It's applied by the NHD company that everybody, it's that summary page, and then the buyers and the sellers and the agents sign on that last page. And that's what is statutorily required, that statement page. Well, how do you get that statement page? You have to order an NHD. So technically the NHD isn't required, although it's required in our office because it's a disclosure issue if they're not, but that statement page is required. So you're going to have to get that page when you order the NHD. It's asked if is 3K. Yeah, wherever, the blank part is where they disclose other things that they, additional things that they know about. The question was, where do they, if they're exempt, where do they disclose things that they are aware of? You can disclose it on 3K and type to your heart's content, because what's going to happen if you go over, then it's going to create an addendum automatically and just continue on the addendum. So that's that. So I don't think there's any questions about the NHD statement, because it is pretty self-explanatory. All right, we will go next. If the property is built before 1978, once again, 1978, if the property is 1978 or younger, built before that, you need to do a lead-based paint disclosure. And the seller needs to, if they have no knowledge of the first question is, you have no knowledge except the following, and they can disclose, most likely the house was painted with lead-based paint at some time, and they're not going to have any records of remediating that anywhere, unless they actually went to a lead-based paint remediation company, which nobody really does. So they're usually not going to disclose anything, and everybody signs off on this, and that's that. I see that there are. Is this required for the trustor selling? It is still required, yes. The only thing they're exempt from is the TDS, and subsequently the SBQ, because if you're exempt from the TDS, then you're automatically exempt from the SBQ. So, but they're not exempt from this, because do you know if it's built before 1978, you're going to have that knowledge. So if you have that knowledge that it's before 1978, then you know that there is a disclosure about lead-based paint regarding the property that was built before 78, and the sellers have no knowledge of lead-based paint or hazards in the house. So they don't fill anything out. They're not disclosing anything because they have no knowledge of it. So that's that. Any questions on lead-based paint? Because now we're coming to the really, well, no, I'm going to go to something different before I tackle that one. No questions. Okay, so if a house is built before 1960, then you're going to need to do the earthquake questionnaire. Now, you have to find that questionnaire under, I'm going to show you, California Association of Realtors. These are all the forms from CAR, but then you pull down that drop box or whatever you want to call it, and you go to, I lost it now. Oh, EPUBs, California EPUBs, and where'd it go? Sorry. There we go. And this is a great place to send all of your required disclosures about lead-based paint, earthquake. These are all the booklets. We used to have to give away a booklet. Every office had a whole bunch of these booklets. Well, you can just send them directly from here. It's pages 1 through 4. And this is what's required if it's built before 1960, which is the residential earthquake risk disclosure statement. So it asks a whole bunch of questions. And here they give you an option of, I don't know. So is the water heater braced? Well, in LA, you're going to have to do that. But bolted, if they don't know it's bolted, they say, I don't know. So they just answer all of these questions to the best of their ability, and then they sign it. So any questions? This is easier because everybody's given the option of I don't know. But here's the thing, listing agents, if the house is on a hillside and your seller says don't know, then you kind of have to step in and say, you see that thing that drops there? That means you're on a hill. So you need to guide them at that point. If they're answering things incorrectly, you kind of need to nudge them, because I can tell you that any buyer's agent who doesn't think that the seller is taking these questions seriously, then you're gonna get some pushback. So it's all right to give a little nudge if you know what they're saying isn't correct, but you can't fill it out for them. So there are any questions about that? That also applies to the TDS and the SVQ. Okay, no questions. Speaking of which, I'm gonna go to, I gotta get back out of this. I'm gonna go to the SBQ. Like I said, it's not required, it's not a statutory requirement, it's a contractual requirement. So it's in the RPA that if you're not exempt and you have to fill out a TDS, then you have to fill out an SBQ. And what is an SBQ? I call it the TDS on steroids, because it gets into a whole bunch of additional questions, and this is where, since they're not exempt, this is where those questions that are on the exempt form are asked here on the SBQ about the death on the property and about the meth, was it a meth house and all that, what, that thing. Then it goes into repairs, structural systems and appliances, disaster insurance and civil, if there's been a lawsuit and if they've gotten assistance because of a disaster, they need to disclose that. Mold issue, pets and animals. I tell sellers, if if they have pets and they've checked yes, then say, yes, I have a cat, or I've had this, or I've had that. Because a lot of times they just check it and don't do anything with it. But people may have a huge sensitivity to cats. I've had snakes. People may be freaked out by that. So what, you just have them disclose exactly what it is. Just don't say yes and say, well, it's pretty self-explanatory because it's, if I say I had a pet, I had a pet, fill it out. I had a dog. I sold the property I work with a greyhound adoption. We bring greyhounds up from Mexico, and I sold our president's house in Pasadena. That house has had like 15 dogs through it at any given time. So I told her, you need to disclose that. And she did. She had no problem disclosing it. She ran a rescue, and we would bring all these dogs up. And she herself would have like 6 or 8 dogs at any given time. So anyways, Maureen, you have your hand up.
Yes, let's say the seller completes the TDS and the SPQ, and they've been submitted to the buyer's agent and the buyer. And after the buyer goes through it, they have some questions, and the TDS and the SPQ needs to be updated in some kind of a way. What's the best way to do that? Through an addendum?
You could do it through an addendum. This is an addendum. I had a seller that after we supplied the disclosures, she remembered about something that had happened. There was a leak somewhere or something, and we did an addendum, and and they sign off on it. Sure.
Perfect.
Addendum is
yeah.
done after the contingency has expired, or I'm sorry, they've removed the contingency. That removal.
They have 5
days.
days. They have 5 days. Jimmy asks, what about coyotes? Well, that's in this form. So yeah. We lived on a property at the top of the Burbank Hill. We had coyotes, we had mountain lions, we had deers walk by, we had everything there. Title and ownership, neighborhood, that's a big thing, and it says, is there noise, past or present disputes or issues with a neighbor? I don't think she's on here, but I think Louisa in Calabasas had a client who their neighbor across the way would shine the brightest light on their property. These two hated each other. You got to disclose that. I mean, it's going to make it hard to sell. Yes, I agree, but you don't disclose that, and that's an issue. There was, I said that there was wildlife. Now I don't. Pets, animals, is that where it is? Oh yeah, livestock, wildlife, insect, pets. That's where that is. Okay.
Rich,
And yes,
if you're TDS exempt, are you SPQ exempt?
yes. If you don't have to do the TDS, you don't have to do the SBQ. So, so that's, tell your seller, disclose. I mean, I know sellers don't want, they don't want to disclose these things, but you really need to. Excuse me. So any questions about the SPQ? I don't see any. So we will go. Okay. Because I know that there is going to be a lot of questions about this. Okay, fire hardening and defensible space. Who's meeting? Oh, it was Calabasas' meeting. My NHD, I specifically asked the question this past Tuesday. My NHD, who we have an affiliation with, all of the offices have an affiliation with, I believe. When they issue an NHD report, and if that property is in a high or very high fire zone, whether it be state, county, or local, that report will generate this form. So that's a great benefit. So then you really don't have to guess, because you should be ordering your NHD report when you go on your listing appointment, or when you as soon as you start showings. The seller doesn't pay for it until it closes escrow. So there's no harm, no foul. Go to Calabasas escrow or Westwood escrow, or whatever whatever the other ones are. Just go to the escrow, the in-house escrow company, and order the NHD, because from my NHD, because they automatically generate this form. And I'm telling you that there is, so if it is in a high or very high fire zone, this form is required for the seller to fill out. Okay.
Is
So-
this where you, I'm sorry, is this where you let a buyer know that you cannot, or it's difficult to line up fire insurance? All these companies have been pulling back on that.
No, the time that you let the buyer know about insurance, not only fire insurance, insurance period, is the moment that you open escrow. That buyer should be told to start looking for insurance, because some insurance and some insurance companies are taking weeks to get an estimate to buyers for what the price is. Insurance is crazy. The premiums are insane. I used to pay $600 a year for my homeowner's insurance on a 2,000 square foot house that was built in 1928. That insurance on that house probably now is $5,000 to $6,000, because insurance rates are insane. So you want your buyer to know what they're going to be paying for insurance as soon as possible, because insurance is part of your investigation. So once you remove investigations, then they have no recourse. They are stuck with whatever premium they have to pay. Number one. Number two, if they can't get insurance, you can always get insurance through the state of California, through the FAIR plan. But that, if you think regular rates are insane, that policy is insane, and it covers pretty much nothing. I mean, it's a horrible policy. So buyers should be looking for insurance as soon as they get in an escrow, and don't remove that investigation contingency, or at least the insurability part of that investigation contingency, until the buyers are happy with what they're getting. They're not going to be happy, but as happy as they can be.
So do you suggest then when you write the offer that your contingency should be, I don't know if long is the right term to use, but you indicated that insurance companies could take a couple weeks to get back. So if you have a, like a 10-day contingency, that may not be long enough.
Right. So, sorry. You can write in the offer, and some agents are doing this now. They're writing that the insurability aspect of the investigation contingency is your investigations of the property and everything can be 10 days, but that portion, the insurability, is people are going up to 21 days. So I absolutely would suggest that you do
maybe
that.
something to the effect of sales contingency upon buyer's approval of insurance.
No, that's too vague. It's
Okay.
unfortunately it's too vague. And I don't think any seller would ever agree to that.
Okay.
Especially in this climate in California and insurance. So yeah, I would just try to extend the contingency period for insurability. So so basically this form, if it's in a high or very high fire zone, this has to be filled out by the seller. So the first part, the fire hardening part, is kind of like the SBQ. And the sellers that, are you aware if, do you have these? Do you have roof coverings made of untreated wood shingles or shakes, or, vent openings in excess of, they need to answer those questions if they're aware of them. So it's just like the SBQ. So it gets to defensible space disclosure. This is where people are tripped up. And I know that at the end of this, there is this decision tree thing, which I find so confusing, and it really is not helpful. I don't find it helpful. So I will explain this form as to how you should look at this form, okay, and counsel your seller. Okay. So first, 3A asks, is there a local compliance requirement? So the property is or is not subject to a local vegetation management ordinance requiring defensible space around an improvement. So that's the seller should know. So local vegetation, is the seller required to clear vegetation around their property by the city? I know where I mentioned that at the top of the Burbank Hill, there is an ordinance that the homeowners need to clear brush around their property. So the answer to that would be yes. But a lot of properties that are in a high or very high fire zone are not required to do that. If you don't live on a house on a mountainside or a hillside and have vegetation around, but you're in a high fire zone, chances are they don't. But the seller should know this. So that first section, the seller should know the answer to that question as to whether they are or are not required to clear vegetation. So then we go to B, and it says seller representation of property compliance with the applicable state defensible state requirement or local vegetation management ordinance. Okay, so it defaults to seller is unaware of whether the property is in compliance with the state or local defensible space law, seller does not have a report prepared by the authorized defensible space inspector. So chances are the seller is never going to have a report. That's number one. So if they're unaware, if they're in compliance, then they just stop right there. Okay. So number two says the property is in compliance with state or local defensible space law, whichever is applicable. If only state law applies, seller must have obtained compliance within the last 6 months. So let's look at that. I said most likely they never will have a report. So this probably wouldn't be the answer because they wouldn't have the report. So they wouldn't know that they're in compliance. That's number two. Number three, property is not in compliance with state or local vegetation law, whichever is applicable, if seller has or agrees to obtain a report prepared by the powers that be, which by the way is CAL FIRE or local fire department. Those are the only authorized people who can do this report. Seller shall deliver such report to the buyer within 3 days after the seller's execution of this FHDS. So here's the thing. In Southern California, and I said this at Calabasas' team meeting on Tuesday, it is not required for the seller as a point of sale to get this report done. It is not required. I know that on CAL FIRE's website, they say it is required. It is not required. I know that my NHD said the seller should be arranging this. It is not a point of sale requirement in Southern California. The only place per CAR legal that it is required is somewhere in Northern California around Truckee. So they are never going to have to give this report or get this report. So most likely the answer to this question is that the seller, they leave it at the default that the seller is unaware of whether the property is in compliance. That's usually what you're going to say, whether there is or is not a local vegetation management ordinance, and check that appropriately, and then leave the rest alone, because they're not going to get a report. They don't have to get a report. But if they have gotten a report, which some sellers want to do this, it's not an issue for the seller to do it. It's just that they don't have to do that. So then we go to C, buyer and seller agreement regarding which party shall obtain compliance. So, buyer responsibility, no local ordinance. Buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance with the state defensible state law within 1 year of close of escrow. Now, if it's not, there isn't a local ordinance, then you would just leave it at that. Number two says buyer responsibility, local vegetation management ordinance in effect, which requires compliance as a result of sale of the property. Local ordinance allows either seller or buyer to obtain the documentation. There is no ordinance that requires that as a point of sale, so that wouldn't be an option. Local vegetation management ordinance in effect, I'm on number three, which does not require compliance as a result of the sale of the property. Buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance with the state defensible state law within 1 year of close of escrow. So if the property has a local vegetation clearance ordinance and we know that there is no point of sale, then 3 would be the option. It will never be the seller's responsibility unless the seller is agreeing to do this. So going back, most likely the seller is going to check whether it is or is not required for a local vegetation management ordinance, whether they're required to clear brush. So whether they are or are not, you're going to check, the seller is going to check that. Going to leave B alone. And then if there is not a local ordinance, C is left alone. If there is a local ordinance, then 3 will be checked, that the local vegetation management ordinance is in effect, which does not require compliance as a result of the sale of the property. So that's how you should fill this, how the seller should be filling this out. If they have an inspection report, then you would check 4. And then that's it. Then it goes into the decision 3, which I think will only confuse you. So, all right, hit me up. What are the questions? Any questions? You guys got it? Oh, I
Rich,
see.
going back to
it.
page 1.
Yes.
Can you go up
Okay.
a little bit? Yeah, okay. No.
Sure.
Go to number 3. Sorry.
To
Go
number
down.
3. Okay. Number
Okay.
3. Okay.
Number 3A.
3A.
Number 3A. I know you mentioned it,
Mhm.
but I messed up. Local ordinance requirement, the property is or is not. Are we going to go back to NHD to see if it is or it's not?
No, the NHD will not tell you whether there is a local ordinance. The seller will have to know whether they are required by local ordinance. My example, Burbank Hills, there is a local ordinance that you have to clear brush around your property. The seller's going to know that, because if the seller doesn't do that, guess what? The fire department comes up and does it, and they bill the seller. So you're going to know, most likely the seller is going to know if there is this local ordinance. So the seller is going to know if there is or is not a local ordinance. Okay.
What I meant is, how would the owner know this? I mean, would they call the fire
I
department?
just told you. I just know they will know, because they will know whether they need to clear brush around their house, because I'm telling you, because if they don't do it, then the fire department does it and they bill you. So they will know. You ask your sellers who live in the hillsides whether there is a local ordinance about removing brush from around their house. I almost guarantee that they will know this. Okay. Okay. So once again, you answer whether it is or is not a requirement to clear brush around your house. So most likely you're going to leave 3B alone. Seller is unaware of whether the property is in compliance, state or local defensible state law, and the seller does not have a report. And then if there is not a local ordinance to clear brush, then you're going to leave C alone. If there is a local ordinance, then you're going to check 3, fire responsibility, local vegetation management ordinance in effect, which does not require the compliance as a result of the sale of the property, because it is not a requirement in Southern California to get this at point of sale. If they do get a report, it's good for 6 months. Okay. All right. Any other questions about this? things are going up. I'm not seeing any.
I have a quick peripheral question. That's
Sure.
not these disclosures, but
A quick what question? I'm sorry, I was changing.
peripheral. It's regarding disclosures, but not these particular forms. If
Okay.
another agent were to ask us how many offers we have on a listing, it's answering multiple is sufficient. We don't have to give a direct.
You don't have to say how many. Yeah,
Okay,
I've
good.
had, I've got multiple offers.
Good.
And direction from your seller. I mean, if you have multiple offers, I would have ask your seller, do you want me to disclose whether those offers are over or under asking price? Because that could nudge some people sometimes. I mean, always take direction from your seller.
That's exactly what I thought. I had a
Yeah.
broker show up to an open house I had, telling me that I was required to tell him how many offers I had.
No, you're not required to tell how many offers you have. No, you can just say I have multiple offers and more than one.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? I think I'm gonna leave it here because I could take all day. I'm avid, so maybe I'll go over avid the next time. Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm also gonna stop recording and say